There are signs in Earth's deep history that challenge everything we assume about the past. What if none of it is accidental? What if this impossibly precise cradle for life isn't a cosmic coincidence, but a carefully constructed stage? What if the challenges we face, the suffering we endure, and the choices we make when no one is watching? What if all of it is being measured? Ancient civilizations spoke of trials and judgments. Modern thinkers wonder if we're living inside a simulation. Across millennia, the question hasn't changed. Are we being tested? So settle in and slow your breath. Let the weight of the day fall away. Whether you're wrapped in darkness or resting in soft light, allow your thoughts to loosen as we drift into a quieter, gentler story about our planet's past. If you sit quietly with the idea that Earth might be a test, the first thing that happens is the world around you starts to look slightly different. The chair you're sitting in, the walls around you, the sound in the background, even the way the air feels on your skin. They all take on a strange quality, as if they're part of a setting that was arranged rather than just something that happened to be there. It's a bit like walking into a room you've been in 100 times and suddenly noticing a detail you've never seen before. The place hasn't changed. You have. That's what makes this thought so persistent. It's not something you can entirely prove or disprove, but once you've considered it, you start running everyday life through a new filter. The long commute you've always hated, is it just an inconvenience, or is it meant to teach you patience? The sudden challenge you didn't expect, bad luck, or part of an intentional obstacle course. Even the people you meet, the ones who seem to appear at exactly the right or wrong moment, start to look like pieces on a board that someone else has arranged. The first thing to notice is how perfectly calibrated Earth's conditions are for supporting life. Not just supporting it, but challenging it in ways that force adaptation without making survival impossible. Scientists talk about the Goldilocks zone, the narrow band around a star where a planet is neither too hot nor too cold for liquid water. Earth sits in that zone with suspicious precision. Too close to the sun and our oceans would boil away. Too far and we'd be locked in permanent ice. But here we are, orbiting at a distance that seems almost deliberately chosen. The tilt of Earth's axis gives us seasons. Not so extreme that half the planet becomes uninhabitable, but variable enough to require planning, adaptation, and innovation. Agriculture depends on these predictable cycles. Animal migrations follow them. Human civilizations have organized themselves around the rhythm of planting and harvest for thousands of years. If the tilt were much steeper, weather would be chaotic and violent. If it were much shallower, the climate would be monotonous, reducing the pressures that drive evolutionary change. Then there's the Moon. It's unusually large compared to Earth, sitting at just the right distance to create tides that stir the oceans without flooding continents. Those tides may have been essential to the development of early life, creating coastal zones where conditions shifted regularly, driving organisms to adapt. The Moon also stabilizes Earth's rotation, preventing chaotic wobbles that could make the climate unpredictable over long timescales. From a testing perspective, this is ideal. Long-term stability combined with short-term challenges creates an environment where life can develop complexity without being constantly reset by catastrophic instability. Our atmosphere is another example of precise calibration, thick enough to shield us from meteors and radiation, yet thin enough to let in the sunlight we need. The mixture of gases is nearly perfect, mostly nitrogen and oxygen, with just enough carbon dioxide to help regulate temperature without tipping into a runaway greenhouse effect. At least that was the case until humans began altering the balance. If oxygen levels were much higher, fires would rage out of control. If they were lower, complex life couldn't exist. The precision feels less like chance and more like someone set the dials very carefully. The magnetic field generated by Earth's molten core deflects solar wind and cosmic radiation that would otherwise strip away our atmosphere over geological time. Mars lacks a strong magnetic field, and its thin atmosphere can't protect the surface the way ours does. Without that invisible shield, Earth would be far more vulnerable to bursts of solar energy that could damage ecosystems and disrupt any emerging civilizations. If you were designing a long-term experiment with complex participants, you'd want protection from catastrophic interruptions. Not complete safety, but enough stability to let the test run for billions of years. Water exists on Earth in all three states: solid, liquid, and gas, moving constantly between them in a cycle that regulates climate, supports diverse ecosystems, and provides the variety of environments needed for different forms of life to emerge. A test without variety would produce narrow results. Earth's range of environments, deserts, rainforests, tundras, oceans, mountains, pushes life to adapt in countless ways. The outcome is a biosphere so diverse that no single catastrophe can wipe it all out. That kind of resilience could be exactly what you'd want to measure in a long-running evaluation. Even the dangerous aspects of Earth start to look deliberate when viewed through this lens. Hurricanes, earthquakes, droughts, volcanic eruptions. They cause immense suffering and destruction, but they also force adaptation. They push societies to develop technology, cooperation, and long-term planning. They test resilience on both individual and collective levels. A perfectly safe, unchanging world might be comfortable, but it wouldn't reveal much about how life responds to pressure. The challenges built into Earth's systems could be features, not bugs. When scientists talk about the improbability of life emerging here, they mention the sheer number of factors that had to align. The Sun is unusually stable for a star of its size. Our solar system has giant planets like Jupiter that act as gravitational shields, deflecting comets and asteroids that might otherwise strike Earth far more often. The chemical composition of our planet matches exactly what's needed for biological processes, down to trace elements that are rare elsewhere in the universe. Some call this fine-tuning. Others see it as the inevitable result of the anthropic principle. We can only observe a universe that allows for our existence, so of course it looks perfect to us. But if you lean into the test scenario, that fine-tuning is simply the setup. The experiment begins with a starting environment where success is possible but not guaranteed. That way, you can see what happens when life is given a near-perfect foundation and then challenged with unpredictable changes. It's worth noting how fragile some of these balances are. Tilt the conditions too far in one direction and the whole system collapses. Ice ages can lock away huge portions of the planet's water for thousands of years. Shifts in atmospheric composition can tip the climate into inhospitable extremes. Large impacts from space can reset the evolutionary clock. And yet, despite at least 5 mass extinction events in the last half-billion years, life has returned each time, often in new and more complex forms. From a certain point of view, that's exactly what you'd want to see in a test. Not perfection without struggle, but recovery after devastation. The ability to rebuild, to adapt, to try again, with different strategies. If the observers are watching for resilience and creativity, these cycles of destruction and renewal would be the most revealing moments in the entire experiment. The pattern suggests something important. If this is a test, it isn't about reaching a static endpoint of perfection. It's about demonstrating the capacity to persist, to learn, to evolve in response to changing conditions. Every species that has ever lived on Earth participated in this process, whether they knew it or not. And we're simply the latest participants in a trial that has been running for billions of years, watching organisms rise and fall, adapt and fail, always under conditions that seem calibrated to be challenging enough to matter, but not so harsh that nothing survives. If the planet has been prepared with such precision, then the next question is about the script, whether the challenges and opportunities within this setting are as deliberate as the conditions themselves. Because if the stage is this finely built, it would be strange if the events that take place here were purely random. Life here doesn't happen without a set of rules. We may not remember agreeing to them. We may not even fully understand them, but they're there and they shape everything we do. Time moves forward. No matter what you do, you can't slow it, pause it, or reverse it. You can't go back to redo a moment or skip ahead to see how something turns out. Every choice you make locks in the path behind you and reshapes the one ahead. In a test, that would be one of the most effective rules of all. If you can't see the outcome in advance, you have to decide based on the information you have now, and you have to live with the consequences. That alone reveals a lot about character, judgment, and adaptability. Then there's physical vulnerability. Bodies need food, water, and rest. They're subject to injury and illness. They wear out over time. None of us gets to opt out of this limitation. In a way, it levels the playing field. No matter where you start, you're bound by the same basic needs. In a test scenario, this ensures that survival is never automatic. It has to be earned day after day by meeting those needs despite whatever else might be happening. Pain, both physical and emotional, might be another built-in rule. It's a signal that something is wrong, but it's also a teacher. Pain changes behaviour. It pushes you to avoid certain actions and to seek out solutions. It can deepen empathy when you see someone else suffering in a way you understand. Without pain, there's no immediate feedback for bad choices or dangerous situations. With it, there's constant data about how we respond to difficulty, whether we avoid it, face it, or use it as a reason to help others. Loss is everywhere. Nothing and no one here is permanent. People, possessions, opportunities, all of them can disappear, sometimes without warning. In a test, that could be intentional, a way to see how participants handle change they can't prevent. Do they cling to what's gone, adapt to what's left, or build something new entirely? In everyday life, loss feels personal, but in the larger picture, it could be one of the most revealing measures of all. Resources are limited. There isn't enough of everything for everyone to have as much as they want. That scarcity forces decisions. Do you share or take more for yourself? Do you compete or cooperate? Do you hoard out of fear or trust that you'll get what you need? In a cooperative game, scarcity tests teamwork. In a competitive one, it tests strategy. Here, it tests both because we live in a mix of cooperation and competition all the time. Not all the rules are about restriction. Some are about opportunity, but those come with their own hidden limits. You can learn new skills, build relationships, create things that didn't exist before. You can move to new places, change careers, start over entirely if you're willing to take the risk. But every opportunity has a cost in time, energy, or resources. And the rule about time moving forward means you can't take every opportunity that comes your way. You have to choose, and in choosing, you're tested. What makes these rules especially tricky is that they don't always reveal themselves right away. Some you learn through experience, others you never quite figure out even after decades. Sometimes you think you found a loophole only to discover later that it's another part of the test. A scenario designed to see how you handle what looks like an easy win, but turns out to have consequences. The rules aren't the same for everyone. We're not all born in the same circumstances. Some people start with wealth, health, and safety. Others start with poverty, illness, or danger. From one point of view, that seems unfair. From another, it's a way to measure different variables. How do people respond when they begin with an advantage? How do they respond when they begin at a disadvantage? Do the starting conditions predict the outcome? Or can determination, intelligence, and support from others change the result? The diversity of human experience isn't a flaw in this framework, it's the point. The variation in starting positions, environments, and challenges creates a wide range of possible responses. In a test, that's exactly what you'd want if the goal is to gather as much information as possible about how intelligent, adaptable beings handle life under different conditions. And yet, even knowing all of this, we don't get a rulebook. There's no list to check off, no official guide telling you which actions lead to a better score. We have to guess, experiment, and learn as we go. That uncertainty can be frustrating, but it's also what makes the process revealing. If you knew exactly what was being measured, you might tailor your behaviour to fit it. Without that knowledge, your actions show your real priorities, not just the ones that would earn you points. In that way, the rules we never agreed to are less like a strict set of laws, and more like the physics of the game we're in. They set the boundaries of what's possible, the conditions under which we operate. You can't change them, but you can learn to work within them, and in doing so, you reveal something about yourself. It's possible that the very act of learning the rules is part of the test. Some people go through life without ever thinking about them. Others spend years trying to understand the system, looking for patterns, pushing against the limits to see where they give. In an environment designed to evaluate adaptability, both approaches could be worth observing. If you go looking for the earliest ideas about why we're here, you don't find equations or laboratory notes. You find stories passed down by memory long before writing, carved into stone, painted on cave walls, spoken around fires, whispered in temples. Long before anyone had the tools to measure the distance to the sun or map the ocean floor, people were already trying to explain life in terms that made sense to them. And over, in different places and times, you find the same thread. Life is a kind of trial. In ancient Egypt, one of the most famous images from their mythology is the weighing of the heart. After death, the heart of the deceased would be placed on a scale opposite the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and order. If the heart was lighter than the feather, you could enter the afterlife. If it was heavier, it was devoured and your existence ended. That's not just storytelling. That's a belief in a system that evaluates and judges every individual. In ancient Greece, philosophers often frame life as a proving ground for the soul. Plato spoke about the immortal soul being tested through its earthly experiences, learning and refining itself through each lifetime. Even the concept of virtue in Greek thought, qualities like courage, temperance and justice, carries the weight of something you're expected to develop through effort, not something you're automatically given. Across the world, in ancient China, Confucianism emphasized life as a continuous exercise in self-cultivation, an ongoing assessment of moral character. A person's behavior in family, community, and governance was not just about practical order. It was a measure of who you were and whether you lived up to your role in a harmonious society. Indigenous traditions in the Americas, Africa, and Oceania often speak in terms of journeys, trials, and lessons. In some Native American stories, life is seen as a path with obstacles meant to teach wisdom. In many African traditions, hardships are understood as essential experiences that prepare the spirit for its place among the ancestors. In Polynesian cultures, challenges at sea and on land are often tied to spiritual growth, with endurance and respect for the natural world serving as measures of readiness. Religions built on written scripture tend to be even more explicit. In Islam, the Quran repeatedly describes life as a trial from God, with rewards and consequences based on faith and actions. In Christianity, there's the concept of being judged at the end of life, with salvation or damnation depending on one's deeds and belief. In Hinduism, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, samsara, is often described as a series of lessons, with karma acting as both the record and the mechanism of the test. What's fascinating is how these ideas persist across such different cultures and time periods. The specifics vary: who's administering the test, what's being measured, what the rewards and punishments look like. But the core remains the same. Life isn't random, it's a process with stakes. How you act matters, and there's something or someone keeping track. That similarity could be explained in several ways. Maybe it's evidence that different civilizations were all sensing the same underlying truth, each putting it into their own words. Maybe it's just a reflection of how human minds work. We want life to have meaning, and a test is an easy structure to understand. Or maybe it's something more strategic. If you were designing an environment like this, embedding the idea of a trial into the culture could be a way of steering behavior without direct interference. The belief that your actions are being watched and judged, even if you can't see the observer, can be a powerful motivator. You can see that in the way these ancient systems often balance reward and fear. Paradise, enlightenment, becoming one with the divine, those are appealing outcomes. Eternal punishment, exile, reincarnation into a less fortunate form, those are consequences most would want to avoid. In a world without constant surveillance or modern law enforcement, these beliefs worked as a kind of invisible framework for maintaining order. It's also worth noticing how many of these ancient tests involve both individual and communal aspects. It's not just about what you do alone, it's about how you function within a group. In many traditions, selfishness or harm to the community is one of the quickest ways to fail. Cooperation, generosity, and fulfilling your role are often the ways to succeed. If you were looking to measure whether a species could work together on a large scale, these would be exactly the values you'd want to encourage early on. Of course, these ancient whispers also leave room for doubt. If life is a test, why do the rules seem so different depending on where and when you're born? Why does one culture say the key is faith in a specific God, while another says it's living in harmony with nature, and another says it's mastering certain virtues? If this were a controlled experiment, you could argue that the variety is part of the design. By giving different groups different instructions, you could see how they develop, how they interact when they meet, and whether they can reconcile their differences. And that raises another possibility. Maybe the test isn't about the rules themselves, but about what we do when the rules conflict. History is full of moments where different cultures, each convinced they knew the correct path, came into contact. Sometimes those encounters led to exchange and cooperation. Other times they led to conquest and destruction. From a testing perspective, both outcomes would be revealing. When you start thinking about the depth of these old beliefs, you realize they've shaped not just personal behavior, but the entire course of civilizations. They've influenced laws, inspired art, guided exploration, and justified wars. If they are part of a larger test, their role would be far more than symbolic. They'd be a central mechanism in steering the human experiment. Even today, long after many of these ancient cultures have faded, their core ideas linger. The belief that life has a purpose beyond survival still shows up in secular philosophies, self-help movements, and the way we talk about personal growth. We might not call it a trial anymore, but the idea that we're here to learn, improve, or prove something is hard to shake. And maybe that persistence is the most telling sign of all. Across thousands of years, countless languages, and every kind of human society, we keep returning to the same question. What is this for? The answers we've given have been wrapped in myth, ritual, philosophy, and faith. But the question itself has never gone away. That could mean it's simply part of being human, or it could mean it's a question we're meant to keep asking, one of the test's central prompts, still waiting for us to figure out. If the idea of life as a test has been with us for as long as we've been telling stories, then the next step is to wonder who, if anyone, might be administering it. That's where the thought starts to shift from the symbolic to the literal. Ancient traditions gave names and faces to the ones they believed were watching. Gods, spirits, ancestors, celestial judges. They imagined them in human form, or as animals, or as forces of nature. But if you take the core idea and strip away the specific images, you're left with a simple, unsettling question. Is someone really out there observing everything we do? If there is, they've been careful. Whoever they are, they haven't landed on the White House lawn or appeared in the middle of a crowded stadium to make their presence obvious. They haven't broadcast a clear message in every language explaining the rules and goals. If they're watching, they're doing it in a way that leaves us guessing. And maybe that's intentional. In any experiment, if the subjects know exactly what's being studied, their behavior changes. That's as true in psychology labs as it is in classrooms or job interviews. If Earth is a test, keeping the observers hidden might be the only way to get unfiltered results. You could imagine a range of possibilities for who these watchers might be. The oldest and most familiar is the divine, a creator or a group of creators whose power is beyond our comprehension. In that version, everything we see is their work, and every moment of our lives is known to them. For those who believe this, the idea of being observed isn't unsettling. It's reassuring. It means there's a purpose, even if it's not fully explained, and that no act, good or bad, goes unnoticed. Then there's the extraterrestrial possibility. Somewhere out in the galaxy, or in another galaxy entirely, there could be a civilization so advanced that our entire planet is just one of countless projects they monitor. To them, Earth could be a controlled environment, like a nature reserve or a long-running field study. From their perspective, we might not be much different from wildlife researchers tracking animals to study their migration. The difference is that our tags might be invisible, built into the very fabric of the reality we experience. It's also possible to think about the watchers as future humans. If time travel or advanced simulation technology ever becomes real, It's conceivable that our descendants could look back on this period in history and decide to recreate it, not as entertainment, but as a study. In that scenario, we might be living inside a reconstruction of Earth's past, every detail recreated from historical records, every person simulated with enough complexity to behave as if they were real. The observers could be stepping in and out of our reality without us noticing, adjusting variables and seeing how we respond. That idea brings us closer to what's often called the simulation hypothesis, the notion that our entire world could be a highly detailed computer-generated environment run by some intelligence outside of it. If that's the case, then the observers aren't just watching from a distance. They're in complete control of the environment's rules, from the physics that govern matter to the events that unfold in history, whether they're classified as scientists, engineers, or something closer to storytellers would depend on their motives. Throughout history, there have been moments when people claim to have seen or heard something that didn't fit the normal pattern of life. Strange lights in the sky, visions of beings from beyond, sudden insights or messages that seem to come from nowhere. To some, these are simply coincidences, illusions, or misunderstandings. To others, they're hints that the watchers aren't entirely absent, just cautious. The problem with hints is that they're open to interpretation. One person's miracle is another's optical illusion. A mysterious sound could be a technical glitch or a deliberate signal. If the watchers are real and they want ambiguity, this is the perfect approach. Make appearances just rare and strange enough that they spark curiosity, but not enough to remove doubt. That way, those who are inclined to believe will see evidence, and those who are inclined to doubt will find explanations. Both groups will continue behaving according to their own instincts, giving the observers a more complete picture. It's worth asking what they'd be looking for. If they're divine in nature, perhaps they're focused on moral and spiritual growth. Whether we learn to live with compassion, whether we resist the temptation to harm others for personal gain. If they're extraterrestrial, their goals could be more scientific. Testing how an intelligent species develops technology, governance, and social structures in an isolated environment. If they're future humans, their interest might be in understanding the turning points of history, the moments when we made choices that led to survival or disaster. The scale of observation could vary too. Some possibilities imagine every action being recorded, every thought somehow registered, as if each person's life is a complete file in a vast archive. Others suggest the focus might be on trends rather than individuals, watching how groups form and dissolve, how cultures change, how technology alters the balance between cooperation and conflict. In that sense, the observers might be less like exam proctors and more like ecologists watching a forest, noting the balance between species, the cycles of growth and collapse, the subtle changes over time. If they are there, their methods could be far beyond anything we can imagine. They might be able to alter events on a global scale without leaving a trace, nudging entire civilizations in one direction or another. Or they might only intervene in the smallest ways, like placing a single stone in a river to see how the current shifts. From our perspective, both kinds of actions could be invisible, hidden in the noise of history. There's also the possibility that we've mistaken their absence for non-existence. Just because we haven't detected them doesn't mean they're not there. We already live in a world full of signals and forces that we can't see without the right instruments. Radiation, magnetic fields, the vast web of radio transmissions passing through us every second. An observer with technology we can't comprehend could be close enough to touch without us having the faintest idea. And then there's the question of whether they care about the outcome in the same way we do. If we're the ones being tested, we naturally assume the results matter deeply, but to the observers, the test could be one of many. We might be one project among thousands, no more or less important than any other. That doesn't have to make our lives feel meaningless, but it does change the perspective. It's possible to imagine a scenario where our successes and failures are data points in a much larger study, interesting but not central to the lives of those collecting them. What makes the thought most unsettling isn't necessarily that someone is watching. It's that we don't know their intentions. Are they rooting for us to succeed? Are they indifferent, simply gathering information? Are they testing us for reasons we wouldn't even understand? Without that knowledge, we're left with speculation. And speculation can make you see patterns in places you'd normally overlook. If civilization is the classroom, then suffering is one of its most persistent and unavoidable lessons. No matter where you live, no matter what systems are in place, no matter how much progress humanity seems to make, suffering keeps showing up in one form or another. It's not evenly distributed, it's not predictable, and it's not something anyone volunteers for. Yet it's everywhere, woven into the fabric of human experience so tightly that you can't imagine a version of life without it. And if this is a test, suffering might be one of the central questions on the exam. It's not just the obvious physical forms: illness, injury, hunger, loss of shelter. Those are the most visible, but suffering can also be quieter and harder to measure. Loneliness, fear, guilt, uncertainty, regret over something you can't undo. The slow erosion of hope when a problem doesn't seem to have a solution. These kinds of pain don't leave visible scars, but they shape lives just as deeply as anything physical. From the perspective of an observer, these different forms of suffering could be like different test modules, each one designed to measure a specific quality: resilience, empathy, adaptability, or perhaps something we don't have a name for yet. The unsettling thing is that if this environment was deliberately designed, suffering could be there by choice, not by accident. That's a hard idea to sit with. Most of us are used to thinking of suffering as something to eliminate. In science, medicine, in technology, in politics, much of human effort has gone into trying to reduce pain and hardship. But in a testing framework, removing suffering entirely could defeat the purpose. It would be like giving a math exam without any problems to solve. If the goal is to see how we respond, the challenge has to remain. There are patterns to suffering that make it seem even more deliberate. It often comes without warning, forcing us to adapt quickly. It doesn't always strike in proportion to a person's actions. Sometimes good people face terrible hardship, while those who cause harm seem untouched. In human terms, this feels unfair. In testing terms, it could be intentional. An opportunity to see how people react when the world doesn't match their sense of justice. Do they become bitter? Do they work harder to create fairness for others? Do they lose faith in the idea of purpose altogether? Suffering also has a way of creating crossroads. A crisis can break someone down, but it can also push them to discover strengths they didn't know they had. It can turn strangers into allies, change the direction of a life, or spark a movement that affects thousands or millions. From the outside, these moments could be exactly the kind of turning points an observer would want to study. The same event could lead one person to despair and another to transformation. The difference between the two might say more about human nature than any easy victory ever could. If you look back through history, you can see entire eras defined by collective suffering. Wars, famines, pandemics, natural disasters. They disrupt the structure of civilization, forcing societies to adapt or collapse. In some cases, the aftermath leads to breakthroughs in technology, medicine, or governance. In others, it leads to long periods of stagnation or decline. Again, from a testing perspective, both outcomes are informative. They show whether a group can turn hardship into growth, or whether it falls apart under pressure. One of the hardest aspects to accept is how often suffering is caused by other people. Violence, exploitation, neglect. These aren't the work of an uncaring universe, but of human choices. If Earth is a test, this could be one of the most important parts of it, seeing how we treat each other when given the ability to cause harm or prevent it. Every act of cruelty and every act of kindness becomes part of the record. The contrast between the two might be what the test is really about. That's where empathy comes in. And empathy itself might be one of the most difficult things to measure without suffering. It's easy to be kind when nothing is at stake. It's harder when you have something to lose, when helping someone else costs you time, resources, or safety. Suffering creates those moments, situations, where helping is optional but costly. Do we step in anyway? Do we ignore it? Do we convince ourselves it's not our responsibility? From the outside, these decisions could be as revealing as any scientific measurement. There's also the strange way suffering can connect people who might otherwise never meet. A shared hardship can break down social barriers, at least temporarily. It can make enemies see each other as human, or bring together people from entirely different worlds. In those moments, suffering becomes the catalyst for cooperation, even if it's not the kind of cooperation anyone would wish for. If the watchers are looking for signs of unity under pressure, these moments would stand out. But suffering doesn't guarantee unity. It can just as easily drive people apart, breeding resentment, mistrust, and selfishness. This dual nature, the potential to unite or divide, makes it a perfect variable to study. The same event that sparks generosity in one person might spark greed in another. The question isn't just who survives, but how they survive, and what kind of person they become in the process. On a personal level, suffering forces constant choices about perspective. Do you see yourself as a victim of circumstance, or as someone capable of shaping your response? Do you believe your pain has meaning, or do you see it as meaningless chaos? Those beliefs can influence every decision afterward, sometimes for a lifetime. If this is a test, the way we frame our own suffering might be just as important as the suffering itself. There's also the possibility that suffering is not just a test for individuals, but for entire systems. A crisis can reveal the strengths and weaknesses of governments, communities, and organizations. How quickly do they respond? Do they prioritize those in greatest need, or protect the interests of the powerful? Do they adapt their policies, or double down on failing approaches? From the outside, these responses could be like stress tests in engineering. Push the system until it shows where it will break. For all of this, suffering remains something most of us want to avoid. And that desire might be part of the test as well. We invent medicines, safety devices, disaster prevention systems, all in an effort to reduce harm. That's a form of problem solving, and it's one of humanity's strengths, but it also comes with trade-offs. Sometimes the measures we create to prevent suffering cause new problems of their own. From the outside, watching how we balance prevention with unintended consequences would be another layer of observation. And then there's the question of meaning. Some people find ways to frame their suffering as part of a larger purpose, a spiritual journey, a test of faith, a contribution to a greater good. Others see it as meaningless and cruel, a flaw in the design of life. Both views can shape behavior in powerful ways. If the observers are looking for a variety in responses, this might be one of the richest areas of data. The same pain can lead one person to activism, another to isolation, another to cynicism, and another to forgiveness. The most difficult thing about suffering, if you see it as part of a deliberate design, is accepting that it might not be meant to go away. Not entirely. Every generation works to make life better, and in many ways it does get better. Fewer people live in extreme poverty. More survive diseases that once were fatal. More have access to knowledge and opportunity. But suffering never disappears. It changes shape. Old dangers are replaced by new ones. The specific tests shift, but the presence of hardship remains constant. If you think of it like an ongoing evaluation, that constancy makes sense. Without adversity, there's nothing to reveal the choices we make under pressure. Without loss, there's no measure of how we value what we have. Without risk, there's no way to know how far we'll go to protect what matters to us. That doesn't make suffering easier to bear, but it does make it harder to dismiss as meaningless if you believe the environment is intentional. And so suffering becomes not just an unfortunate part of life, but one of its most revealing features. It's the condition that forces us to decide over and over who we are and what we're willing to stand for. If Earth is a test, those decisions might be the most important answers we ever give. Answers we're still giving even now, in moments we don't always recognize as significant until they've passed. When you step back far enough, far beyond the span of human history, suffering takes on an entirely different scale. It's not just the personal struggles of individuals or the challenges faced by a single civilization. It's the recurring pattern of life itself, rising and falling, vanishing and returning in new forms. The planet has seen more endings than any of us can easily imagine, and just as many beginnings. If Earth is a test, these vast cycles might be the ultimate reset button, wiping the slate clean and seeing what emerges next. We tend to think of extinction as something rare, a catastrophic exception to the normal flow of life. But in geological terms, is not rare at all. Most of the species that have ever existed are gone. The fossil record is a long archive of experiments that ended, some abruptly, some gradually, each one leaving behind clues, but no living descendants. From the smallest organisms to the largest predators, extinction is the rule, not the exception. The causes are as varied as the forms of life that have been lost. Sometimes it's a slow change in climate, the gradual shifting of continents, or the steady alteration of ocean chemistry. Other times is a sudden event, a massive volcanic eruption, an asteroid impact, a rapid shift in the atmosphere. Whatever the trigger, the result is the same. Entire branches of the tree of life cut off, leaving space for something new to grow. If you imagine the watchers observing all this, it's easy to see the appeal. In one sweep, an extinction event tests adaptability on a massive scale. It forces survivors to navigate an entirely changed environment, to find new ways to live, to evolve into forms that fit the new conditions. In some cases, the survivors are small, overlooked species that suddenly thrive in the absence of former giants. In others, entirely new lineages emerge to dominate. From a testing perspective, these are rich data points, demonstrations of how life responds when the rules change overnight. The most famous example in popular memory is the asteroid impact that ended the age of the dinosaurs. For tens of millions of years they had ruled the land, their dominance unquestioned. Then, in a geological instant, they were gone. The survivors, small mammals, birds, reptiles, faced a world stripped of its old order. Some adapted, some didn't. Eventually, one of those small mammalian lineages would give rise to us. If you see Earth as a test, it's hard not to notice how that one reset cleared the way for our own existence. But that wasn't the only reset. Long before the dinosaurs, there were other mass extinctions. The Permian-Triassic event, often called the Great Dying, wiped out 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. The Ordovician-Silurian extinction devastated marine life. Each one was a different kind of trial, removing most of what had existed and setting the stage for new forms of life to emerge. Each one changed the balance of the planet in ways that would have been unimaginable beforehand. From a human perspective, these events are unimaginably distant, but in the scale of the test, they could be deliberate intervals, like clearing the desk between assignments. If the watchers want to see not just how life adapts to slow changes, but how it handles rapid, high-stakes transformations, extinction and renewal are the perfect tools. They strip away stability, remove the familiar, and leave only those who can improvise under pressure. It's not just about biology either. Even within human history, there are cycles that echo this pattern on a smaller scale. Civilizations rise, reach their peak, and then collapse, often leaving behind only ruins and stories. Sometimes they fall to external forces, invasions, plagues, natural disasters. Other times they crumble from within, undone by political instability, economic collapse, or environmental degradation. In the wake of these collapses, new societies emerge, often borrowing ideas from the old, but shaping them into something different. The fall of the Roman Empire is one example, remembered for centuries as a symbol of both power and fragility. The collapse of the Maya civilization, the decline of ancient Mesopotamian cities, the disintegration of the Khmer Empire in Southeast Asia. Each one is a reminder that no system is immune to change. And in each case, what came afterward was not simply a repeat of what had been before, but a reinvention shaped by the lessons and losses of the past. From the standpoint of a test, these cycles could serve a similar function to mass extinction events in nature. They test the resilience of systems, the ability of survivors to adapt, and the capacity for innovation under pressure. They also provide opportunities for the introduction of entirely new ideas, technologies, and cultural frameworks, the intellectual equivalent of new species filling an empty ecological niche. It's tempting to see these cycles as failures, as if each collapse means the participants didn't pass the test. But another way to see them is as part of the process. In many educational systems, failure isn't the end, it's a step toward mastery. You take the test, see where you went wrong, and try again. The collapse of a civilization might not be a final judgment, but a way of clearing the field for a different attempt. If that's the case, then renewal is just as important as extinction. The new systems that emerge aren't created in a vacuum. They're shaped by the memory of what came before. Even if knowledge is lost, traces remain in architecture, artifacts, and oral traditions. These remnants can guide future generations, offering warnings and inspiration. Renewal is a chance to apply those lessons, to avoid the mistakes of the past, or to make entirely new ones. The interplay between extinction and renewal might be one of the most revealing aspects of life on Earth. Too much stability and there's no pressure to adapt. Too much change and there's no chance to build anything lasting. The balance between the two determines the pace and direction of development. In that balance, you can see a kind of rhythm, long stretches of relative stability, punctuated by sudden upheavals, each one reshaping the possibilities for what comes next. Humans are unique in one way. We can see these patterns and, at least in theory, prepare for them. We can study the past, identify risks, and try to prevent or mitigate the next collapse. That adds another layer to the test. If the watchers are observing, they might not just be interested in how we survive after disaster, but whether we can anticipate it and act before it happens. That's a different skill entirely, one that requires foresight, cooperation, and the willingness to act on incomplete information. So far, our record is mixed. We have prevented some disasters, adapted to others, and ignored warnings until it was too late in still more cases. Climate change, nuclear proliferation, and ecosystem collapse are just a few of the challenges that could test our ability to break the cycle, to choose renewal without needing the extinction part first. Whether we can do that might be one of the most important questions in the current stage of the test, and there's an even deeper possibility, that these cycles aren't random at all, but timed. In a long-term experiment, you might schedule resets to occur at intervals, giving each new iteration a similar starting point. The triggers could be natural phenomena, or they could be engineered by the watchers in ways we can't detect. If that's true, then the test might not just be about surviving change, but about recognizing the pattern and learning to adapt to it proactively. Whether deliberate or not, extinction and renewal have shaped every stage of life on this planet. They're the forces that have cleared paths for new possibilities, destroyed the complacent, and rewarded the adaptable. From the first single-celled organisms to complex civilizations, everything that exists now is here because something else didn't make it. If Earth is a test, then these cycles are the most dramatic questions we face. Questions written not in words, but in the turning of ages, the rise and fall of species, the ruins left behind when one world ends and another begins. If the cycles of extinction and renewal are deliberate, if they've been shaped with precision rather than left to random chance, then it's worth asking a question that once you think it, is hard to shake. What if all of this isn't just part of a natural system, but part of an entirely artificial one? What if the world we live in, from the smallest detail in a grain of sand to the vast sweep of galaxies overhead, isn't fundamentally real in the way we assume, but a kind of constructed environment? This is where the simulation hypothesis enters the conversation, not as wild science fiction, but as a serious possibility, entertained by philosophers, scientists, and technologists. The idea is deceptively simple. We might be living inside a simulation created by an intelligence outside our reality. That intelligence could be a highly advanced alien civilization, future humans with unimaginable computational power, or something we can't categorize at all. Inside the simulation, everything would feel real because it's built to. The physics are consistent, the history is detailed, and the experiences are convincing. but outside it there's a completely different level of reality, one we can't access, at least not directly. The unsettling part is that according to some thinkers, it might actually be more likely that we are in a simulation than not. The reasoning goes like this: if any civilization anywhere reaches the point where they can simulate conscious beings and detailed environments, they probably won't do it just once. They might run countless simulations for research, entertainment, or purposes we can't guess. If that's the case, the number of simulated worlds could vastly outnumber real ones, meaning that statistically the odds of us being in the original physical reality could be extremely small. If you take this seriously, it offers a very different way to interpret the cycles of extinction and renewal we've seen throughout Earth's history. In a simulation, those could be programmed events, large-scale environmental resets triggered by code designed to test how the inhabitants respond to sudden change. Each extinction event could be like hitting a reset switch on part of the simulation, clearing out certain parameters and introducing new variables to see what happens. The simulation hypothesis also offers an explanation for some of the stranger aspects of our universe. The way physical constants seem fine-tuned for life, for example. In physics, the values of certain fundamental properties, like the strength of gravity or the mass of the electron, seem oddly precise. If they were even slightly different, life as we know it wouldn't exist. In a simulation, this wouldn't have to be a coincidence. Those constants could be deliberately set by the programmers, just like a game designer sets the rules of their virtual world. It also raises questions about the apparent limits of our reality. In computing, processing power is finite, so simulations often optimize resources by rendering only what's necessary at any given moment. If the universe we experience works the same way, there could be limits to what's actually rendered in full detail. The world beyond our direct observation might exist only as data until it's needed. Some physicists have even speculated that certain unexplained phenomena in quantum mechanics, like the observer effect, could hint at an underlying computational structure, as if the universe updates only when observed. And then there's the matter of glitches. In our technology, no system is perfect. Even highly advanced simulations could have small errors, moments when the environment doesn't behave exactly as intended. In human life, strange coincidences, impossible seeming patterns, or sudden changes in probability could be interpreted as these glitches, brief glimpses of the underlying code showing through. Most people dismiss such moments as chance, but in a simulation framework they take on a different weight. Of course, if we are in a simulation, the natural next question is why. The purposes could be as varied as the possible designers. If it's an advanced alien civilization, maybe they're studying the development of intelligent life under different conditions. If it's future humans, perhaps they're running simulations of their own history to understand it better, or to test scenarios before making decisions in their own time. It's even possible the simulation is entertainment, an elaborate form of storytelling or immersive experience for beings who find our struggles and triumphs worth watching. The idea also reframes the possibility of a test. In a physical world, the test might be a metaphor for life's challenges. In a simulation, it could be literal. The programmers could have built the environment with specific conditions and objectives to measure behavior. The cycles of extinction and renewal could be part of those objectives, as could the moral, social, and technological challenges we face. Every choice we make, individually and collectively, could be logged and analysed in real time. There's an unsettling implication here. In a simulation, the observers have the ability to intervene at any moment, altering conditions to see how we respond. That intervention could be as small as influencing the outcome of a single event, or as large as triggering global changes in climate, resources, or political stability. From our perspective, these would look like natural events or human-caused developments. From theirs, they'd be intentional manipulations of the environment. And yet, if this is true, there's a kind of strange safety in it. In most simulations, the simulated beings can't die in any ultimate sense. Their consciousness is part of the code, and if the program is stopped or altered, it can be saved, copied, or transferred. That doesn't make the experience inside the simulation any less real to us, but it does open the door to the idea that death might not mean the end from the perspective of the designers. Still, the simulation hypothesis leaves us with more questions than answers. If the designers are capable of creating a reality this detailed, why reveal it at all? Why not keep it completely seamless, without even the faintest hint of its artificial nature? One possibility is that part of the test is whether we can figure it out. In a world where the truth is hidden but discoverable, those who look closely enough might eventually see patterns that point beyond the surface. That act of seeing could itself be part of what's being measured. Another question is whether we could ever leave the simulation, not just die within it, but actually exit to whatever's outside. In theory, if our consciousness is just data, it could be transferred to a different system or into a physical body in another reality. But whether the designers would allow that is another matter entirely. If the purpose is to observe, they might keep the boundaries firmly closed. If the purpose is to train or prepare us, there might be a point at which graduation means moving into a different reality. For now, we're left inside looking for signs, and those signs, if they exist, could be anywhere. In the patterns of history, in the fine-tuning of physics, in the moments that feel too precise or too strange to be random. Each one is a possible crack in the surface, an invitation to look deeper. Whether we ever find proof might depend on whether proof is part of the design, or whether uncertainty is the point. And if uncertainty is the point, then the simulation hypothesis might not be a theory to solve, but a lens to look through. A way to see the test as something that isn't just playing out on Earth, but in an environment whose boundaries we can't yet see. The extinction events, the renewal cycles, the suffering, the cooperation and conflict of civilization, all of it could be lines in a program still running, still being evaluated. If the simulation idea holds any truth, or even if we set it aside and just consider the possibility that Earth is some kind of trial, then the most unnerving part might be that we don't actually know what's being tested. It's one thing to sit down for an exam when you've been told the subject and format. It's another to realise you might be taking a test every day without being told the questions, the scoring system, or even the criteria for passing. That possibility changes the way you look at ordinary life, because suddenly everything becomes suspect. Every decision, every interaction, every impulse you either follow or resist, any of it could be part of an evaluation you're unaware of. The most effective tests in a controlled study are often the ones the participants don't know they're part of. Psychologists have used this principle for decades. When subjects are told exactly what's being measured, they change their behaviour, consciously or not, to try to match expectations. But if they believe they're doing something ordinary, filling out an unrelated survey, working on a neutral task, their genuine responses emerge. If Earth is a test, the same principle might apply on a planetary scale. The only way to see our unfiltered nature is to make the evaluation invisible. That means the real questions might not be written in the obvious places. They might be hiding inside the routines of everyday life. How you treat someone when you think there's nothing to gain. Whether you help a stranger when no one is watching. The way you behave when you have power over someone else and when they have power over you. These moments could be the equivalent of short answer questions scattered throughout the day, each one contributing to a larger pattern. The unsettling part is that you can't fake a pattern for long. Even if you're aware of being observed in some vague way, the details of your behaviour eventually reveal what you really prioritise. Do you only act fairly when there's a reward? Do you abandon principles under stress? Do you stay consistent even when it costs you? In a hidden test, those patterns might matter more than the occasional dramatic choice. It's not just individuals who could be tested this way. Entire societies might be subject to invisible evaluations. How a community responds to scarcity could be one question. Whether a nation upholds its ideals when it's inconvenient could be another. Global cooperation in the face of a shared threat could be a large-scale version of the same thing. From the point of view of an external observer, watching these situations unfold, without announcing the stakes would reveal far more about our true nature than asking us directly. The problem is that if we don't know the questions, we also don't know the scope of the answers. A decision that feels small could have far-reaching implications in the structure of the test. Ignoring someone in need might be weighted differently if it happens in a time of abundance versus a time of crisis. Choosing to cooperate might be valued differently depending on the personal risk involved. The same action could be interpreted in opposite ways depending on context, and we'd have no way of knowing which was which. And then there's the possibility that some of the questions are built into long-term scenarios, the kind that take decades or even centuries to play out. A civilization's environmental policies, for example, might be a test of foresight and responsibility. The results wouldn't be visible until the consequences arrived, and by then most of the decision makers would be gone. In that kind of setup, the real subjects of the test aren't the individuals making the choices, but the species as a whole. If you think about it like that, even some of the most mundane parts of life could be part of the design. Economic systems could test fairness and greed. Legal systems could test justice and flexibility. Technology could test wisdom and restraint. These wouldn't be side effects, they'd be built-in conditions, like sections on a sprawling exam, each one measuring a different capacity. We might move through them without recognizing them for what they are, interpreting them as normal life when in fact they're deliberate challenges. In a way, this also reframes some of history's biggest turning points: wars, revolutions, scientific breakthroughs. What if they weren't just random products of human ambition and error, but milestones in a long sequence of evaluations? Each one could be designed to see how we handle shifts in power, the introduction of new knowledge, or the disruption of established systems. Success and failure might not even be measured in terms we understand. From the outside, both could be valuable for understanding how a species like ours functions. One of the more unnerving implications is that if the test is hidden, there's no guarantee the criteria match our own sense of morality. We might believe we're doing well by our own standards, being kind, working hard, protecting those we care about, and still be failing according to some unseen metric. Maybe the test is about adaptability more than kindness, or maybe it values collective survival over individual achievement. Without the answer key, we're navigating blind, hoping our instincts align with the objectives. And yet, that might be the point. A hidden test measures not just what we do when we know the rules, but how we act when we don't. Do we cling to personal values even without confirmation they're right? Do we adapt our behaviour in response to changing conditions, or stay rigid and predictable? In an environment like this, the lack of feedback isn't a flaw. It's part of the mechanism. The uncertainty forces us to reveal what matters to us most, because we can't tailor our actions to match the scoring system. This also explains why, if there are watchers, they might allow so much apparent randomness. Natural disasters, sudden opportunities, inexplicable strokes of luck or misfortune. All of these could be ways of introducing variables into the test without signalling that they're part of it. The more chaotic the environment, the harder it is to fake a response. True priorities emerge when plans are disrupted and control slips away. If you take this seriously, it makes the idea of passing or failing more complicated. In a traditional test, the outcome is clear. You either meet the requirements or you don't. In a hidden, ongoing test, the outcome might be more about accumulation, the sum of thousands of small decisions over time. No single action decides it, but together they form a picture of who we are, individually and collectively. The result might not even be binary. It could be a spectrum with different kinds of passing leading to different outcomes. What's more, the test might not end for everyone at the same time. Individuals could be evaluated out of the system at death, while the species as a whole remains under observation. The data from countless individual lifetimes could be used to shape the next phase of the test, altering conditions to push the group in new directions. This would mean the evaluation is both continuous and evolving, without a fixed endpoint until the designers decide it's time. In that light, the uncertainty we live with every day, the sense that we don't have all the answers, stops being a frustrating flaw of existence. and starts looking like an intentional feature. If we knew exactly what was being tested, we could game the system. Without that knowledge, we have to navigate by our own moral compass, our own sense of reason, and our own capacity for empathy and foresight. Whether those are the right tools is something only the designers would know. It also leaves open the possibility that some of us might get closer to the truth than others. Certain individuals might notice patterns, draw connections, or recognize that certain scenarios feel too precise to be random. They might begin to suspect there's a structure beneath the surface, even if they can't see it clearly. In the context of the test, these people could be the ones the observers are most interested in, not because they have the answers, but because they're asking the right questions. And that brings us to the real challenge of living inside a test you don't know you're taking. It forces you to live with ambiguity. Every choice could matter, but you can't confirm which ones do. Every moment could be a question, but you don't get to see it written down. You're left to decide how to act in the absence of certainty. And in the end, that might be the purest test of all. If that's the case, then the real mystery isn't whether we're being tested, but what the next stage might look like. If the unseen examiners are collecting answers, sooner or later they'll decide it's time to move us forward. The only question is whether we'll recognize it when it happens, or whether it will look like just another part of ordinary life. If the tests are hidden, then the next question almost asks itself: how much of our behavior is really ours to control? Free will sits at the heart of the idea that life can be evaluated. If we don't choose our actions, then it's hard to claim that our responses mean anything. And yet, the more you think about it, the more complicated it becomes to separate the choices we actively make from the conditions that shape them. The common assumption is that we act from our own desires, thoughts, and reasoning, but so much of what we do is influenced by things we didn't choose: the body we're born into, the time and place we live in, the family that raises us, the culture that surrounds us. These factors shape our instincts before we're even aware they exist. They set the stage for every decision, narrowing or expanding the possibilities we see as available. If Earth is a test, then free will might not be an all-or-nothing condition. It could be more like a spectrum, with each person's range of choices defined by circumstances they had no say in. That raises a problem for the idea of a fair evaluation. If one person is born into safety and abundance and another into poverty and danger, can their actions really be compared on equal terms? The watchers, if they exist, would have to account for this. They might measure us not against some universal standard, but against what we could reasonably do within our own situation. In that model, the test isn't about reaching the same outcome, but about how well we navigate the particular hand we've been dealt. It also opens up the possibility that part of the test is about whether we can expand our own range of choices. Humans have the rare ability to reflect on our instincts and override them, at least sometimes. We can notice when our culture has given us a biased view, or when our fears are pushing us toward a bad decision. We can learn from experiences that don't just affect our own lives, but also prepare us to act differently next time. From an outside perspective, the measure might not be which choice we make in the first place, but whether we're capable of altering our decisions as we grow. But then there's another layer. What if free will itself is an illusion, at least in the strictest sense? Neuroscience has shown that the brain can begin preparing for an action milliseconds before we consciously decide to take it. Some experiments suggest that what we think of as a conscious decision might actually be more like a post-event explanation, the brain acting first and the mind creating a story afterward about why we did it. If that's true, then the entire framework of moral responsibility becomes harder to define. If the watchers are real and have control over the simulation, or even just over the conditions of the test, they could influence our decisions in ways we'd never detect. Slight changes to our environment, the sequence of events in a day, or even our emotional state could steer us toward one outcome or another. This wouldn't have to be dramatic. In human psychology experiments, tiny changes in framing or timing can have enormous effects on choices. In a controlled environment like this, the possibilities for subtle manipulation are endless, and yet, even with those constraints, people still surprise each other. Acts of unexpected kindness or cruelty, sudden bursts of creativity or destruction, moments when someone defies all predictions. These are the places where free will might be most visible, if it exists at all. If the test is designed to measure anything, it might be looking for those deviations, the times when someone steps outside what the system could have reasonably expected of them. There's also the question of how much free will matters to the purpose of the test. If the goal is to see how we react to certain conditions, then predictability might not be a flaw. It might be the data itself. In that sense, the illusion of free will could be enough, as long as we believe we're acting autonomously. From our perspective, that belief would still shape how we approach problems and relationships, which in turn shapes the outcomes that can be observed. But for us inside the system, the belief in free will has consequences beyond testing. It underpins our sense of responsibility, our laws and our ethics. Without it, punishment and reward become harder to justify. If no one is truly responsible for their actions, then concepts like justice or even moral growth start to lose their meaning. So even if the designers knew free will was limited or non-existent, they might still want us to believe in it. That belief keeps our social structures functioning and keeps us engaged in the challenges we face. The real twist might be that free will isn't just something we either have or don't. It could be another variable in the test itself. Maybe part of the experiment is to see whether we can recognize the limits on our freedom and work to expand them. This could apply on both personal and collective levels. On the personal side, that might mean resisting destructive impulses, overcoming biases, or developing new habits. On the collective side, it could mean changing laws, dismantling unjust systems, or creating opportunities for more people to have meaningful choices in their lives. That framing would make sense of a lot of what we see in history: the long struggles for civil rights, the debates over personal autonomy, the conflicts between authority and individual expression. Each of these could be a section of the test focused specifically on our relationship with choice and control. The outcomes wouldn't just measure what we do, but how much we fight to preserve or expand the ability to choose in the first place. In the end, whether free will is absolute, partial, or an illusion might matter less to the test than how we act within whatever range we do have. If we believe we have choices, we act as though we're responsible for them. If we discover limits, we decide whether to accept them or try to break through. Either way, those decisions, real or perceived, become the data that tells the watchers who we are. Whether or not this really is a test, the thought changes the way you move through life. It's one of those ideas that's difficult to unsee once you've considered it seriously. It gets under the surface of daily choices, the way you speak to someone who can't help you, the effort you put into a task no one is checking, the reaction you have to a small moment of unfairness. Even if no watcher exists, imagining one changes your internal posture toward the world. Some people already live this way without calling it a test. They work by principles that assume their actions matter beyond the immediate. For them, the concept of being evaluated isn't tied to a supernatural figure or a hidden observer or a cosmic purpose. It's a commitment to their own standards. Whether they believe in karma, fate, divine judgment, or nothing at all, they act as if their behavior ripples outward in ways that can't be fully measured in the moment. If the test is real, those people might be the ones scoring highest, without even trying to play the game. If it's not real, they've still built lives with meaning, purpose, and integrity, which are rewards in themselves. This is one of the strange comforts of the idea. If you act as if you are in a test, the benefits appear whether or not the test exists. You either pass something cosmic you can't prove, or you leave behind a trail of actions that improve the lives of others. In either case, you lose nothing by behaving as though it matters. But there's also a tension in it. The belief that life might be a test can sharpen focus and responsibility, but it can also create anxiety. For some, it feels motivating to imagine they're accountable to something bigger than themselves. For others, it feels like a weight. the pressure of constant evaluation, the fear of making a wrong move in a game they didn't sign up to play. This mix of feelings might be part of why the test theory isn't more widely embraced. It offers comfort to some and discomfort to others, often in equal measure. The way this idea lands often depends on personal experience. Someone who's faced injustice might resist the thought of a test because it implies someone set the obstacles on purpose. Someone who's overcome incredible odds might find reassurance in it, as if their struggle had meaning beyond survival. In either case, the idea functions like a lens. It doesn't change the facts of life, but it changes how those facts are interpreted. If the test isn't real, that doesn't make the lens useless. Belief systems, even when unprovable, often work because of the behaviours they inspire, not because of their literal truth. A person who believes in an afterlife might be more generous, not because there's proof of reward, but because the belief makes generosity feel more urgent. A person who believes in fate might take risks they wouldn't otherwise take, which in turn changes the trajectory of their life. In this way, what if Earth is a test? Works, whether it's fact or fiction, it's the behaviour it prompts that matters. We see this in history. Societies that believe they're accountable to gods, ancestors, or future generations often create systems of ethics and cooperation that outlast the original belief. Even when the details of the belief fade, the habits remain. A culture might no longer think its harvest depends on a ritual, but it still gathers to share food and support one another because the practice has proven valuable in itself. The test idea could work the same way. Even if future generations reject the premise, the behaviours it shaped could survive. There's also the possibility that the test, real or not, operates best when people don't know which it is. If you knew for certain it was real, you might focus entirely on optimizing for the score, which could lead to shallow or manipulative actions. If you knew for certain it wasn't real, you might dismiss behaviours that have value only in the long term. Uncertainty keeps both possibilities alive, allowing the behaviours to flourish without collapsing into cynicism or calculation. Even in the absence of proof, the question creates a kind of quiet accountability. Imagine waking up each day with two possible truths in mind. Either no one is watching and the meaning you make is the only meaning that exists, or someone is watching and your choices are part of something larger. In both scenarios, your actions still shape the immediate reality for yourself and the people around you. The difference is only in the scope of the ripple effect. Living as if it's a test can also sharpen your awareness of moments that matter. It draws attention to situations that might otherwise pass unnoticed. The decision to speak up when something's wrong, to offer help when it's inconvenient, to listen when you'd rather talk. In the framework of the test, these aren't just personal victories. They're opportunities to demonstrate growth, resilience, and empathy. Whether anyone is measuring them doesn't change the fact that they add weight to the kind of person you become. One challenge is that the test idea can be misused. History is full of examples where belief in a divine or cosmic evaluation has been used to control behaviour, enforce conformity, or punish dissent. The difference between a healthy version of the belief and a harmful one often comes down to whether it encourages personal responsibility or demands blind obedience. A test worth passing should measure qualities that improve life for everyone involved, not just compliance with arbitrary rules. That's why, even if the test is real, it's important to examine the source of the rules you follow. If the watchers exist, they may not care whether you follow every tradition or ritual humans have invented. They may care more about whether you've learned to think critically, to question harmful systems, and to act with integrity even when it costs you. Blind obedience might be as much a sign of failure as selfish. Rebellion, because it suggests you've outsourced your moral judgment instead of developing it. It's also worth considering that if the test exists, its criteria might be simpler than we imagine. Humans have a tendency to complicate things, to create long lists of requirements, rituals, and formalities that may have nothing to do with the original goal. The real test might be as basic as, do you help when you can? Do you harm less than you could? And do you learn from the times you fail? If those are the measures, then the question of whether the test is real becomes less urgent, because those are good practices in any case. The most interesting part of the question might be its effect on perspective. When you think of life as a test, even temporarily, it becomes easier to see patterns that could otherwise seem random. The challenges you've faced, the people you've met, the turning points in your life. In a random world, they're just events. In a test world, they're placements designed to measure something specific. The difference is subtle but powerful, because it can shift frustration into patience and confusion into curiosity. Even if you ultimately reject the idea, the act of considering it can open up new ways of thinking about your place in the world. It can encourage you to reflect on the values you live by, to pay more attention to the impact you have, and to question whether your daily actions align with the kind of outcome you'd want if someone were keeping score. It can also remind you that many of the traits we value, patience, courage, kindness, are most visible in moments that feel like tests, whether or not they are. And perhaps that's the point. Maybe the truth about the test isn't meant to be known. Maybe its greatest value lies in the way it shapes our thinking and behaviour simply by being possible. In that sense, the question is less about what's out there watching us, and more about what's in here guiding us. Whether the test is an external reality or an internal construct, the effect is the same. It nudges us toward a version of ourselves we might not reach otherwise. Throughout history, people have looked to the sky and the earth for signs that something larger was at work. Eclipses that turned day to night without warning. Comets appearing suddenly in the heavens, trailing light across the darkness. Meteor showers arriving like clockwork, but interpreted as omens by those who didn't yet know their source. In every era, people have tried to read meaning in these events. To ancient eyes, a solar eclipse might have been the sky itself, sending a warning or marking an important moment. Even now, in an age of astronomical science, there's a part of us that still feels a pull when the familiar order of the heavens is briefly broken. From the perspective of a hidden test, these disruptions could serve as reminders, subtle ways of saying, the world you think is stable can change without warning. They might be meant to nudge us toward humility or to spark curiosity that leads to deeper understanding. The timing could even be deliberate, aligning rare celestial events with pivotal human moments. That's the kind of connection that's easy to dismiss as coincidence until you start to see a pattern. The Earth itself carries its own set of signs. Natural disasters are often framed as purely destructive, but they also reveal how well we can respond to sudden change. Floods test cooperation and resourcefulness. Earthquakes test preparedness and resilience. Droughts test long-term planning and adaptability. Each one exposes the strengths and weaknesses of the systems we've built, forcing us to confront the gap between how we think the world works and how it actually behaves. From a test designer's perspective, the planet is a perfect variable generator. It can deliver challenges at different scales, local, regional, global, without tipping its hand about whether they're natural or introduced. If the watchers wanted to increase the difficulty, they could make disasters cluster together, or align them with moments of political or social tension to see how multiple pressures interact. The result would be a more complex test, one that measures not just how we handle each problem, but how we manage them in combination. And then there are the signs that don't fit neatly into either natural or artificial categories. Anomalies that resist easy explanation, strange sounds reported from deep in the ocean, lights in the upper atmosphere that don't match known weather or astronomical events, sudden shifts in the behaviour of animals, sometimes before disasters, sometimes without any clear cause. These kinds of occurrences have been recorded in folklore for centuries, and even in modern times they often spark speculation about whether we're seeing more than we understand. Of course, not every anomaly is a message. The Earth is a complex dynamic system, and complexity always produces surprises. But if you're looking for signs of a test, these anomalies take on a different significance. They could be calibration checks, the equivalent of tapping a microphone to make sure it's working, or adjusting the lighting in a theatre to see how the audience reacts. From the inside, they're mysteries. From the outside, they could be routine maintenance. There's also the possibility that some signs are meant to be cumulative. A single unexplained event might be easy to dismiss, but a sequence of them spaced over years or decades could act like a breadcrumb trail. The trick is that different people would notice different breadcrumbs depending on their interest, location, and awareness. Only when enough observations are combined does the pattern start to emerge, and even then it might be open to multiple interpretations. It's worth remembering that humans are pattern-seeking creatures by nature. We're good at spotting connections, sometimes so good that we see them where none exist. This is both a strength and a vulnerability in the context of a hidden test. On the one hand, it allows us to piece together genuine clues. On the other, it means we can chase false patterns endlessly, convinced we're uncovering meaning when we're really looking at noise. A well-designed test could exploit this tendency, placing both real and misleading signs to see who can tell the difference. The question is whether the watchers, if they exist, ever intend for us to find definitive proof in these signs. Maybe the goal is not to confirm their presence, but to keep us looking. A species that always searching for meaning is a species that keeps developing tools, building knowledge, and pushing the boundaries of understanding. Even if we never get a clear answer, the pursuit itself changes us, and that change might be the real point. But if there are signs meant to be noticed, then the most important factor isn't just their existence, but our readiness to interpret them. That means education, communication, and the ability to share information widely. In the modern era, technology gives us the unprecedented ability to detect, record, and compare signs from all over the planet in real time. This could be a turning point in the test, the moment when the isolated fragments of observation start to form a global picture. Whether that picture points to a natural, self-contained world or to something designed from the outside remains to be seen. What's certain is that the sky and earth will keep providing events that challenge our assumptions, force us to adapt, and spark the question of whether we're seeing nature at work or catching glimpses of a larger plan. And if those glimpses are real, then the next question is whether they're warnings, instructions, or simply ways of reminding us that we're not as in control as we think. The last step in this line of thought is to return to the personal. Whether or not the test exists, you still wake up each day and choose how to move through the world. You still interact with others in ways that either build or erode trust, kindness, and cooperation. You still face moments that feel like turning points, even if they don't show up on any scoreboard. The question of the test doesn't remove the weight of those choices. If anything, it adds to it. And so the possibility remains, hovering just out of reach, shaping decisions without forcing them, asking without answering. That's what makes it powerful. You don't need to prove it to live as if it's true. You just need to decide whether the version of yourself who acts as though it matters is the version you want to be. Wherever you happen to be right now, maybe you're at home, maybe you're traveling, maybe you're in a place you've been for years, or a place you just arrived in, this whole thought experiment has been about something that stretches beyond location. It's not just about where you are, but about what you do with the space and time you have. Whether or not Earth really is a test, you're already moving through something that feels like one in its own way. And unlike most tests, this one doesn't have a set schedule, no clear instructions at the top of the page, and no announcement that it's over. You only find out it's ended when you realise you're somewhere else entirely. If this really is a test, then the watchers, whoever or whatever they are, will see the answer in your actions. If it's not, then the people around you will. Either way, the outcome is shaped by the same things: what you choose, what you build, what you leave behind. So wherever you are right now, morning, evening, a busy street, a quiet room, you're still in it. The time is still running. The next moment is still yours to shape. And whether there's an end score waiting for you or not, you still get to decide how you want to be remembered and what kind of mark you'll leave on the place you've been given. That's the kind of question that keeps unfolding long after the conversation ends. And if you found it worth thinking about, then you already know the next part is yours to write.